Welcome in. It's Nick Sainert, Austin Norman, still from Stillwater, Oklahoma, as we get ready for Nebraska's second game of the regional. I think we can all agree that we would be liking to talk about Nebraska's winner's bracket game tonight, but in reality, Nebraska plays for their season, the right to keep their season alive here in 2024. They'll face off against Niagara at 1 p.m. Central Time. We'll be on here for about the next hour or so as we break down, preview what you should know about Niagara, what Nebraska needs to do differently from yesterday at Florida. We had a lot of good post-game reaction yesterday as well. If you missed any of that and you want to check that out before first pitch today, feel free to go back on 93.7 The Ticket and check that out. As always, want to thank our sponsors, Mullen Motors, Sandhills Global, and Blur Events. Sandhills Global is hiring. Find your fit today in their fast-paced growing culture in Lincoln at sandhills.jobs. Mullen Motors is summer's here. Don't settle for road trips in your rundown clunker. Head to Mullen Motors to find your new ride for this year and years to come, just north of 48th and Layton and Lincoln. And last but certainly not least, Blur Events. The road to the College World Series starts now, and the best party for the College World Series is at the Blur Tailgate at Hilton Omaha from June 14th to June 22nd. Get ready for the best tailgating experience that you can find anywhere, just 2 blocks south of the stadium. Up there in Omaha, you can purchase your tickets today at blurevents.com. That's going to be a great thing. We'll be out there. And I think we can all agree that we hope Nebraska is able to shock the world and at least make it to Sunday, as that's kind of the goal. That's the main goal. If Nebraska wins today, they will play in an elimination game against the loser of Florida and Oklahoma State tomorrow afternoon. And another elimination game, potentially could play 2 on Sunday. But most importantly today, first test is Niagara. Austin, first of all, good morning. And what just kind of, as we have had a little less than 24 hours to home over, we've had a lot of discussions about it. What are just kind of your overall thoughts of Nebraska's first game in Stillwater, and then as they head to play Niagara later today?
The first thing that stands out to me about yesterday is just how Nebraska wasn't in control of the game. You saw Florida, score first, good response by Nebraska, but Nebraska played Florida style game. Nebraska was never able to put its imprint on the game and do what it wants to do. The stadium, I think, played how we expected and not at the same time. I think it's more our mindset about the stadium that we need to get into and, what it rewards and how it rewards it. But you see both Niagara and Oklahoma State put up more runs and more hits than Nebraska did. Nebraska's offense was easily the worst offense in the regional yesterday. That's not a good mark. We knew coming in they scored the fewest runs in the regional, but the approach at the plate wasn't the same. They weren't able to spray the ball around the yard or over the fence like the other teams were. So that's a bit of a letdown. Still disappointing. But maybe the biggest thing that I'm curious to watch is the resilience of the team. I know the narrative out there on social media is, oh, Nebraska's been here before. They have experience playing with their back against the wall. Okay, sure. You rattled off 5 games in the Big Ten tournament. You managed to beat Indiana, a couple times, which was necessary. You needed to do that, and that's an NCAA tournament team. But the Big Ten tournament run that Nebraska had is nothing like this regional. Niagara is a conference champ. Florida is the team with the toughest strength of schedule in the country and a top 5 overall draft pick. And then Oklahoma State, won the Big 12 tournament. That's a really solid program and has been for a long time. So yes, Nebraska's been on the brink of elimination before, but I don't think it's fair to compare what Nebraska saw in the Big Ten tournament to what Nebraska is seeing this weekend.
No, you're absolutely right. And I think we realized that. I think the perfect explanation that you used was that we realized yesterday how not in control Nebraska was. And obviously it's an upper hand, and it's not impossible to win a game, I think, when you don't control from start to finish. But we talked about it yesterday, and not to dwell on it so much, but we talked about it yesterday in the post-game show that whenever there were times in the game, I should say, where you felt like Nebraska has a chance to grab the momentum. Right? You kind of felt that pendulum slowly swinging back to Nebraska, but then give credit to Florida, because not only did Nebraska not execute it and really convert those opportunities into results, but Florida did a really good job of just settling down, throwing strikes, and doing their job. because that is just as important. And we might see it today as well. Nebraska will be potentially in Florida's spot, where there might be times if Nebraska finds themselves up 4-2 or 5-3 or whatever the case may be by a few runs later in the stage, middle innings to later innings in the ball game. Nebraska is going to have to be that team where they are able to settle down, kind of keep their all 10 toes planted on the field, throw strikes, do their jobs, and basically not mess up. That is the biggest point. And it's such an underrated piece, because yesterday, from Nebraska's point of view, yeah, they didn't take advantage of opportunities, right? Opportunities where they had a big play in the field and they tried to transition that into the dugout and into the batter's box. They didn't accomplish that. But also that speaks to Florida's ability to be able to settle down, not allow the moment to get too big for themselves, and just throw strikes. Nebraska could be in that position today where a sneaky team like the Niagara Purple Eagles, and we saw it throughout the entire tournament yesterday, things like that happen. Upsets happen. 4 seeds move on. 4 seeds win games that they're not supposed to win. Nebraska could very well be in a position to where they either stay 10 toes down or they make a mistake. And we're talking about how Nebraska went 0-2 in the tournament.
I'm still trying to figure out if yesterday was more a result of Nebraska not being as talented across the board as Florida, or if it was Nebraska's mindset, right? Because I think we talked about both, where Nebraska's approach wasn't consistent, where you had some questionable at-bats in some key spots, and that's mindset. But at the same time, threw harder than Brett Sears, located maybe a little bit better. Caglianone smacked the ball a couple times. Ashton Wilson had a career day, and that's talent, right? So Nebraska just wasn't the better team yesterday. It was Florida very clearly. Nebraska should not and cannot be at a talent disadvantage today against Niagara. But guess what? Their season's on the line too. They're still the plucky underdog against, in this matchup, Nebraska's the favorite. So Nebraska can't play that, we're the hunter, not the hunted card right now. Niagara's coming for you. Niagara's upset, right? They scored 7 runs, and that, doesn't win as many college baseball games as it does Major League Baseball games. So that's still, right around their season output, whereas Nebraska was well beneath. Yeah, they lost by 12, but I think Niagara's going to come in and be fine. So Nebraska has to match Niagara's energy of desperation to keep the season alive. Nebraska has to find a way to, again, I said it yesterday and I'll say it again, Nebraska has to punch first, right? Show Niagara that Nebraska is the big kid on the block, that they are the bully, and they're the 2 seed in this regional for a reason. We have to start fast. There's going to be that moment where Nebraska needs to respond, like you said, like Florida did yesterday. And then if Nebraska can get a run in the 7th, 8th, 9th inning to really, quash any momentum that Niagara might be building, that's going to be big, because Nebraska's not so good that it can rely on an overwhelming talent advantage. Yeah. But Nebraska, doesn't have such a mental edge that it can expect Niagara to roll over today for any reason.
I'm really fascinated to see the number of Husker fans here today, because I think when coming into the regional, we expected a lot, right? We made the drive. It's a very easy drive down here to Stillwater. And I'm not saying that they aren't going to show up. I just wonder the type of numbers that show up, because you can look at it 2 ways. You can look at it as, okay, we're going to wait till Sunday. If they make it to Sunday, then we'll come down and watch a game, right? But then also this isn't a Florida name. This isn't an Oklahoma State name. It's you're playing Niagara, right? That probably doesn't excite a whole lot of people. We know that hotels are full this weekend, but also, Austin, we both kind of agreed the stadium wasn't as full as maybe we expected it. It was overwhelmingly favored to Nebraska, but I expected a little bit more. And so not only, especially when you're playing Florida, I think. Now, maybe the after having the early afternoon type of game hindered it, and I think maybe we'll get a better gauge of it today. But man, I struggle not to envy the teams that are playing in tonight's game, because I think if Nebraska was 1-0 go and played Oklahoma State tonight, I truly believe that there would be quite a few more Husker fans en route to Stillwater.
I think you're onto something there. I mean, yeah, playing the early game on Friday, you couldn't even get off at lunch and make it down unless you were really pedal
Yeah.
to the metal, and then you'd be pulling up right at first pitch. Having a 1 o'clock game today, you would have had to made up your mind, to take the day off yesterday, make the drive, get in last night, and then be in Stillwater today for this game, most likely. I'm sure there will be more Husker fans today than there yesterday. But it comes down to kind of the same conversation of talk about, coaches, do they throw their ace in the first game or do they save him? If you're a Husker fan, you're the ace right now, right? The team's back is against the wall. You can't assume that they're going to make it to Sunday, right? They're going to need you here in person with even more red than there was yesterday to make sure they get to Sunday. But I'm sure there's plenty of Husker fans like you're describing that say, oh, yep, typical Nebraska, lost the first game of a regional. And this is where it's the chicken and the egg of team and fandom relationships. Is it on the fans to support the team no matter what the result is? Or is it up to the team, to give the fans something to come down for? I can understand fans in both sets, right? The ones that are, they're maybe a little hesitant that this program hasn't given them that high level success, so they're not sure if they want to buy the ticket and make the drive just for one game. But I can also understand that the passion and the zeal of Nebraska fans saying, hey, this team needs us. We have to rally behind them. Come, hell or high water, we're making the drive today, and hopefully they can extend their stay another day or maybe two.
Well, and that's the thing. I think the way that the NCAA regional schedule is set up also is there's a good chance that Nebraska feels good about their situation after today, right? I think you can wonder, depending on what happens in the Florida-Oklahoma State game, and this is obviously if Nebraska is victorious over Niagara, that is going to be a game, I think, that scores a lot of runs. We see a lot of runs from Oklahoma State and Florida later tonight. I'm excited to, after we wrap up post-game stuff, go back and check it out, right? Because you're going to have Jack Caglianone on the mound, who's going to be a top 5 pick, but most well known for his bat, right? And then we also know we are well aware of Florida's pitching staff statistical struggles. Maybe that's different in the tournament. But Oklahoma State also was a team that scored 19 last night to Niagara and allowed 7 to the 4 seed in the tournament. And Florida's a much better hitting team, once again, statistically, than Niagara is. So I'm really interested to see later tonight how many pitchers are used, right? If Nebraska is able to make it to Sunday, then you're talking about having an elimination game opportunity. And this is obviously barring Nebraska taking care of business today and doing it just not very, not being extravagant about it, just kind of having it be that nitty gritty, just baseball grinded out victory. And I guess what goes into that is a similar pitching performance that you had yesterday. Most importantly, where you only used 2 guys, right? I think Nebraska needs to get out if they truly want to be victorious in this regional or get a fighter's chance at it. Need to keep that bullpen pretty alive, right? You need to keep it stocked up because Nebraska's in a good spot now, but also you have this weird mix of, once again, the manager of Will Bolt having to make decisions of leaving guys in, replacing guys, bringing guys in through the pen. Niagara used 8 pitchers yesterday. Now, they didn't have extensive outings, but they still had outings. They still were throwing. They still got tacks on their arm. They still had to go through their entire warm-up session, throw basically a bullpen there, then throw in a game. And those are just mental and physical fatigue that Nebraska has the luxury of not having to put on some guys in the pen. So now today it's going to be the question of, is McConaughey able to give you 5 or 6? And then are you able to bring in a Jalen Worthley or Kyle Perry and they get you 3 or 4 to close it out? Don't make it so extravagant. You don't have to make it this, all right, we're going to have McConaughey go 3 and then or 5 and then let's have one guy go 1 inning and then another guy go another inning and try to piece it together. Certainly you need to win. Do whatever you need to take to win the game. But also, Nebraska's got a long road ahead of them if they're going to try to make it out of this regional.
Right. I think you need more from McConaughey today than you got from Sears yesterday. Brett Sears wasn't bad, right? He wasn't his sharpest, but if you look at the results, it was fine. He kept Nebraska in the game. He battled. It was a gritty performance. But I think Florida's seen guys like Brett Sears before, probably seen better. So they weren't scared. They weren't intimidated by him. He was the best pitcher in the Big Ten, but he's a Saturday guy in the SEC, right? Not a headlining starter. I think that's fair to say. Same with Mason McConaughey. Mason McConaughey has to come out and I think dominate Niagara, especially, or at least set the tone for Nebraska. But this is where, do you want a long start out of McConaughey, or do you want things to go according to your plan? Because, Nick, there's a lot of arms in that bullpen who haven't pitched in a while, right? Every time the doors swing open, there's a chance that the guy doesn't have it that day. We know this bullpen has had its struggles. So I think there's a fine line between riding that right arm of Mason McConaughey if he's on a roll and making sure guys are fresh, right? Not just rested, but knocking off the rust. Because if Nebraska's in a good position, if they beat Niagara today, you don't want to bring in a guy that hasn't pitched in a week. And his first appearance is against Florida or against Oklahoma State. So there's, again, we talk about the manager role of a head coach. That's going to be something I'm monitoring today.
Yeah, it's going to be real interesting to see how Rob Childress throws this game. I think also how he calls pitches. How does he decide that? We're going to get much more into Nebraska's lineup and what I think Austin and I would like to see from it later today, because that was one of the conversations that we had yesterday about just disappointing at-bats from a couple of the guys and not calling for them to be benched, but maybe it's just time to go in a different direction for the time being, right? Because now Nebraska's season is on the line. This isn't playing, Purdue on a Wednesday and saying, well, no matter what happens today, we still have another week of baseball. That's not the case here. This is potentially a lot of guys' last game, right? At Nebraska, you don't know what attrition looks like through the portal. You don't know what additions are coming through the portal. I think Nebraska's going to hit that transfer portal somewhat hard this year because they have enough talent in their younger classes to make some noise, I think, in the Big Ten Conference. But as we see, this is now another test of, and Will talks about this, when you come down to a regional, you see the type of level of baseball, how it's a step up, right? Mm-hmm. You're able, they're able to feel it in the game. We're able to feel it up in the press box or down on the concourse. And I think fans are able to see it on TV. Guys are bigger. Guys are stronger. You have more home runs. You're hitting for power, right? Guys throw better. Instead of just being able to, handle and control 2 pitches, they're able to consistently control 3. And it's like the step up of baseball that it's not impossible for Nebraska to get to. You just kind of have to be reminded, I think, of it. And coming to regionals reminds Nebraska. So it's always fascinating to see kind of how teams, not even just the Huskers, but this year specifically, if Nebraska does go 0-2, or if they are done after tomorrow morning, it'll be interesting to see how do they go back and reassess, okay, these are the types of guys that we need to go look for.
It will be interesting because there's such a heavy focus on the JUCO ranks this year, which are guys that you think would be pretty plug and play. But it's always an interesting balance because, yes, they're older. Yes, they've played some level of collegiate baseball. But the guys that Nebraska brought in from JUCO hadn't seen a team like Florida before. Probably haven't seen much of a team like Oklahoma State before. So, yes, they're older, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're more experienced all the time. Polished, right. I think that's a good way to phrase it. So Nebraska will have some guys with some decisions to make, whether it's transfer portal, whether it's MLB draft. I think we talked up the JUCO class this year for good reason. You saw their stats at that level. The staff has connections and likes to go that route. But I almost wonder if Nebraska was, trying to make this year the year, right? Expected more of those guys to maybe be 5-10% better in the transition from the JUCO ranks to the D1 ranks. And maybe that would have gone a long way. I'm curious to see if Nebraska double dips on that strategy. They'll always go back to that well, at least to some degree. Or if Nebraska takes next year as a more developmental, right? Let's see what we have in the freshmen. Let's see what we have in the sophomores. If they're our best players, we're going to get them on the will be good enough. It might be a little bit of a grind, but at the same time, we know that this is building for a run in a couple of years where we only have to get 1 or 2 guys out of the transfer portal instead of a whole class of them.
I think it is interesting, though, because hopefully this is not the case, but if Nebraska does fall later today to Niagara, I think part of it's going to be, what is the narrative, right? What is the feeling around Will Bolt? Because you come in off of a Big Ten title and 0-2 in a regional, right? And certainly, like when you go a little deeper into the game, like yesterday, I suppose is one of those games where you can find a way to just tip your cap and say, "Nice job, Florida," right? But also on the surface level, right? It's what is the feeling around Will Bolt? Because we know his contract expires next year. How long? I think there's going to be an extension in the works, right? Because you won a conference championship, and I'm not trying to discredit that, but it's also I think we're going to maybe find out a lot about Troy Dannon, about how he views baseball and the potential for Nebraska baseball. Because is it a 4-year extension or is it a 2-year extension or is it a 1-year extension? Does he say, let's give you at least 2 more years? I'm really interested when that time comes because it goes back to what is Will Bolt's end goal, right? What is Will Bolt's end goal? And I don't think we know it. I don't know if Will sees Nebraska as his end-all, be-all job. We talk about strictly the salary. Obviously, Kevin O'Sullivan's been a coach at Florida since 2008, but he's getting paid 4 times what Will Bolt's getting paid. And yes, the fan experience and the fan investment is there at Nebraska. I don't know if the athletic department investment is always there at Nebraska. And so, unfortunately, that plays a factor into it. We know, obviously, with a new athletic director, I'm curious to see, and we won't know this answer for 3 or 4 years or until Will Bolt wins a regional, but it's what is Will Bolt's end goal? Because that's a guy similar to Eric Bakich that could really grind out his way in the Big Ten Conference. Really, and yes, he is, obviously previously coached here. He played here and such, but man, there's such a step up in national respect and eyeballs and attention when you're in the SEC or the ACC. And I would not be surprised to see Will Bolt eventually take that Eric Bakich approach, get approached by a bigger institution. And then guess what? Then Will Bolt's job becomes a little bit easier with higher expectations, yes, but he's in a recruiting and baseball hotbed of the United States.
It's such a fascinating conversation because Will Bolt's results at Nebraska right now aren't SEC or ACC caliber, right? Mm-hmm. They're just not, plain and simple. Now, he's been around that area of the country, right? He's had that experience at A&M. We know he knows how Dave Van Horn plays baseball down at Arkansas. Yeah. When you think about a guy making the leap from, a mid-tier baseball conference to an upper-tier baseball conference, they've probably had overwhelmingly great results. I mean, think about what Eric Bakich turned Michigan into, and then in 3 years, what he did with Clemson. Sure, there's more talent down there. Sure, there's a little bit of baseball history down there, but that was a quick turnaround. Will Bolt's had 5 years at Nebraska after the season comes to an end, and it's been okay. You can see the outline of it, but there's not necessarily the consistency. And that's not to say Will Bolt has done an awful job. I don't think that Will Bolt has done a bad job, right? I think a lot of it goes back to alignment that we hear so much from Matt Rule and even Scott Frost before. So much of it goes back to that investment piece from the athletic department and having that shared vision and those shared goals. But it's also fair to say that nothing's ever going to be perfect, right? Yeah. I can tell you things aren't perfect at A&M on the baseball front. They're not perfect at Vanderbilt. They're not perfect at, Kentucky or Tennessee or any place like that. So I don't know if Will Bolt has earned the right to be looking elsewhere. If there are SEC and ACC schools interested in him and he wants a job like that and takes it, again, this is all just speculative, more power to him, right? Great guy, like his approach, at least what he says, well-spoken dude. And based on everything he says, I think he should be a good fit for Nebraska. But at some point, you run out of excuses and you run out of ways to say, well, I just need this, well, I just need that. Well, here's the reality. You don't have it. Here's what you do have. Here's the conference you do play in. The Big Ten isn't that great. Why can't you dominate that league? Why haven't you taken steps to being the power in the league and raising everyone else's level? You're one of the top programs in the Big Ten right now, but you're not the program. And maybe it's Nebraska arrogance speaking. Maybe that'll never be the case. But I think we've seen signs and flashes from this program that it can be that. The schools with less resources are better aligned, so they've been more able to take that step to being, the Big Ten's baseball team such as it is. Why not Nebraska? Who is it going to take at the reins with that force of personality, that vision, and then that ability to execute to make sure that Nebraska is aligned, that Nebraska is investing. It's not going to be easy, but it's absolutely necessary if this program wants to give itself, the shot to get to the next step, whether that's hosting a regional or moving on to a super.
Yeah. And this is, unfortunately, because once again, Will Bolt's comments after 2021 were we have a better idea, right, of what we need to do. And now we are going to be able to get that same kind of response here this year after Stillwater, no matter what the result is. And unfortunately, it's like, man, the 2022, 2023 years could have been so valuable, not only for the building blocks of Nebraska, but also just understanding, okay, this is how you do it. We could be talking about Nebraska going to their 4th straight regional. They had the talent to do it. Just unfortunately didn't the alignment piece that you talk about, Austin. Maybe something was missing, or the communication was off there within Nebraska baseball. But nonetheless, Nebraska in a regional right now, and that's the good thing. 0-1 though after losing 5-2 to Florida yesterday. Nebraska gets ready to play Niagara later today, 1 p.m. Central Time, first pitch at O'Brate Stadium in Stillwater. Once again, we're about 35 minutes away from first pitch in that one, as Nebraska takes on the Purple Eagles. When we come back, let's talk a little bit about maybe what we want to see from Nebraska's lineup today, right? We don't know the pitching matchups. We know Mason McConaughey on one side for Nebraska, but there's a couple of changes, I think, in the lineup that Austin and I would like to see. We'll talk about that when we come back. By the way, thanks to Mullen Motors, Blur Events, and Sandhills Global for their support. As always, in addition to those, Nebraska Corn Board, enhancing demand, adding value, ensuring sustainability. You can learn more about Nebraska Corn Board at nebraskacorn.gov, as well as Members Owned Credit Union. You can invest with your nest. Soar towards the future with a home equity line of credit, and also learn about their certificate special with a 16-month term as high as 5% APY. Learn more at membersowncu.com. Also want to thank Allo Fiber, Landmark Implement, and Select Plumbing for their support of our broadcasts and content down here. Stay tuned to our social media pages later this afternoon as well. We're going to take you around O'Brate Stadium, show you a little bit about what that stadium looks like. I'm excited for that just because I think a lot of Nebraska fans are blessed with Haymarket Park, right? As much space as there is. Obviously, you share it with the Salt Dogs. This is a true Big 12 park, right? The brick, the concourse, the outfield seats and everything. There's some really cool facilities. And once again, that gives Nebraska administration, I think, an idea of how can we make it better? How can we improve Haymarket Park? I think there's space to do so. It's just how can we make it so that when guys go on recruiting visits and view Nebraska versus Oklahoma State, Nebraska versus so-and-so, whoever, insert team here, they are given a leg up. Nebraska is given a leg up. So we'll talk about that later. We'll have videos on our social media pages, not only on Nick_Sanders on Twitter, Austin_Orman, but also on 93.7 The Ticket. So make sure you shoot us a follow over there. When we come back, we talk Nebraska's lineup and we get you ready, continue to get you ready for Nebraska and Niagara coming up in just a little bit. 93.7 The Ticket and theticketfm.com. All right, welcome back into the Nebraska baseball pregame show, getting you ready for Nebraska and Niagara here in 1 p.m. Central Time. Stillwater, Oklahoma. Nick Sanders joined by Austin Orman down here in Stillwater. Apologies for any bad internet connection that you have received from either one of us. We're in a small town just outside of Stillwater called Cushing, Oklahoma. Not a whole lot here. I think the jewel of the town is potentially the Sonic. I grabbed a slushie from there last night. But nonetheless, pretty sure there's not a whole lot going on in Cushing, Oklahoma, Austin.
We haven't found much necessarily. Seems like a nice enough little small town. But yeah, there's a really nice Sonic. There's a really nice Taco Bell. There's McDonald's across the parking lot that I snagged breakfast from today. But was it Cushing, or is it the next town over that was the home of the original Pistol Pete?
That is right. It was the next town over, Perry, Oklahoma.
That's right.
That's right. Yeah. We had the conversation of how famous do you have to be to have your name on a water tower? And we decided, I think, that it's depending on the town. It's dependent on the town. You have to be from a small enough town, but also you can't be so famous that like everybody knows about you, because I bet 80% of the people that go through there are just like, Pistol Pete. I wonder where he got that nickname. I wonder who it is. But cool, he's from Perry, Oklahoma.
Right. It's about the size of the town, and I think it's about how famous you are regionally, right? Because people know the Oklahoma State mascot of Pistol Pete, but there's no way that Frank, I think his name is on the water tower if he's from a town that's outside of Tulsa and then he came to Oklahoma State, right? No one's going to care. The fact that it's, 10, 15 minutes from Stillwater, he's the inspiration for Pistol Pete, and it's a small enough town. That's the perfect storm to get your name on the water tower for that.
It also has to be. This is why it's dependent on the town, because like Lincoln has multiple like water sections, areas. Like they have the ones out by 56th and Pine Lake. They have some, I believe, in North Lincoln. Like you can't put Weird Wally on every single water tower in Lincoln, and so you can't put Pistol Pete if they're from Tulsa, Oklahoma, in multiple water towers. And so it's got to be a small enough town. So good conversation there. Okay, let's talk baseball. Nebraska and Niagara coming up in a little bit here, 1 p.m. first pitch from O'Brate Stadium. Let's first talk about how we feel like the stadium's playing, right? Because I think that conversation can go in line with Nebraska's lineup today. I think like it feels like a small stadium, but it didn't play as small yesterday, at least in Nebraska's game, I think, as we believed it or projected it to be playing into.
The way that I'm going to phrase it is that it did play like a small park, but it didn't necessarily help the offense's play up. It didn't make swinging the bat any easier. It just amplified the rewards is what it did, right? Because the wind, it was pretty dead, but just the thinner air, it was blowing out, it was warmer. I'm curious to see if the wind picks up today, how that plays, but it didn't, do anything to play into Florida's hands because it made Florida's approach better or easier. Florida made good contact and they reaped more rewards because of it, right? So I think what my flaw was in looking at this regional is saying, oh, it's thin air. Nebraska's approach will be fine, so offense is just going to be easier. No, offense isn't easier. You still have to get bat to ball. You still have to make good swing decisions, be on plane, be on time. But if you are, you're more likely to see a greater reward because of how the stadium plays.
It's going to be interesting because the wind, I'm trying to get a direction on this, and then also trying to all right, here we go. So looking like it's going to be about a 10-mile-per-hour wind out of the southeast. I'm trying to think on how the stadium. It's going to be blowing right to left. Is that correct there, Austin? Is that right to left because the stadium faces northeast?
I'll say yes, but I'm also just going to rely on the flags. Directions are not my strong suit. I will take your word for it.
I believe that it's going to go right to left. I know the stadium sits on the northeast corner of a street with home plate. That's where the home plate gate is. So I'm going to say that the southeast wind would just push it back towards the third base side. So nonetheless, though, 10 miles per hour. So we're going to have a little bit more wind today than we did yesterday. And I think you're absolutely right. I think you're onto something. You also have two teams here. And I would love, we're going to try to do this actually for the first time live on air and see if we can do this. Sharing the screen here. Let's see. Let's see.
Work.
Let's see if it works. Okay. So now, are you guys able? No, this is not going to work. Stop sharing. Let's see if we can just pull it up on this actual Chrome then. But nonetheless, I would like to pull up this little chart that we've been using to reference the entire weekend here, Austin, because Nebraska and Niagara, they don't hit a lot of home runs, but man, Niagara really hits for average. They're averaging coming into this tournament, hitting 306. Let's see if we can. Okay, so I've signed into this. Let's see real quick as we're trying to work through this as we go along, so bear with us, folks. But okay. See, as long as it loads, we're going to be able to pull it up here. Hotel Wi-Fi's got to work for me, but nonetheless, Niagara's hitting 306 as a team this year. And it feels like an opportunity for Nebraska. Okay, we're going to try this share screen again, and bang. All right. How's that look?
Great
there
success.
We go. Okay, so if you're watching on the stream, obviously we'll talk through these numbers, right? But these are, and I know Austin's seen this chart, but this is basically all the statistics lined up for Nebraska, Niagara, Florida, and Oklahoma State. And when you look at this, there's a couple of things that I certainly want to point out. And Niagara understanding the conference that they come in, but also it's not like Nebraska's playing in the SEC. You look at these on these second column or second area, and these are Niagara and Nebraska's hitting statistics. You see Nebraska 66 home runs coming into it, 69 for Niagara, so you're pretty similar there. Niagara walks a little bit more often than Nebraska does. This strikeout number, that's the one that I want to point out. Today, it is going to be so crucial for Mason McConaughey to stay in the zone. Mason McConaughey and Nebraska's bullpen needs to stay in the zone. Niagara strikes out only 16.8% of the time coming into the regional, right? Nebraska, a little over 20%, almost 21%. The differences in those percentages are about 170 spots in college baseball rankings. Niagara strikes out the 30, their strikeout numbers offensively, good for 36th in the country. Nebraska all the way down there at 210th. Then you have the average. Niagara's not going to hit for power. We know that. But man, at a ballpark like Oklahoma State, and I can go ahead and take this off, at a ballpark like O'Brate Stadium, this is what's so important. If you put good swings on the ball, you will be rewarded. You just said that, Austin, right? Nebraska, not only defensively and in the field, needs to throw strikes and stay in the zone, but we saw it yesterday to where Florida gets rewarded on strong barrel contact. There's going to be balls that just naturally fly out of the park, even if you just put a good swing on it. Now you add the factor of the wind, you add the factor of the stage and things meaning more. Just every single pitch has a higher magnitude. It's a recipe for if Nebraska doesn't throw strikes that they go 0-2, and it's a recipe for Niagara to potentially get the upset today.
When you read off those numbers, scouting report comes to mind. Defensive positioning is going to be huge for Nebraska today, right? McConaughey's got to hit his spots again, keep the ball down, get ground balls, and then it's going to be on Nebraska's fielders to make sure that they paid attention in their meetings, that they look to their little wristbands or their note cards, they listen to their coaches, whatever it is, because for a contact hitting team like this, balls in play, so naturally more are going to find some grass. You're going to find more base hits, but even with shift rules aren't the same in college as they are in MLB. But even with how Nebraska shifts, I should say, this is a day that everyone has to mind their P's and Q's. It's a very detail-oriented game for Nebraska. Niagara had 3 errors yesterday. So if you're Nebraska on offense, put the ball in play, right? Let them throw it around the yard. See if it wasn't just nerves yesterday. And on the other side for Nebraska, pitching to contact is okay, right? Let that keep Mason McConaughey's pitch count down. Let it keep your bullpen's pitch count down so that if you find yourself in position to move on and play tomorrow, you have more of these guys available. We talked about this. I don't know if it came up on air, but Nebraska's outfield kind of concerned me yesterday, Nick. Swanson didn't see a couple, turned a line drive into a double. The home run, you could tell he didn't necessarily see off the bat. Silva, the catch he made against the wall, impressive catch, but he took a step and a half in and was just fast enough to go make that catch. And then even Case Sanderson, maybe not the most comfortable out in right field, but didn't look like he saw the ball off the bat very well on that double off the wall and right. So good positioning on the infield, right? Go to the spray charts. We know what those look like. How often do they go, down the line between the holes on the middle infielders, back up the middle. But for the outfield especially, I hope those guys have taken a lot of fly balls. I hope the sun is out today, which might sound weird to say, but having played outfield in my day, it's almost easier to see a ball where there's blue sky and just a few white clouds. You can shield the sun. You know where that's at. But yesterday was such a gray day that baseball, when it's up there like that and it's unfamiliar territory, I can get why Nebraska had some bad reads and kind of get lost and, not knowing how the stadium plays. But man, if Niagara is going to be a line drive spray hitting team, it's even more important that Nebraska is in the right position, getting good jumps, good reads, and good breaks to make maybe some nice plays and turn them into outs instead of a base hit that gets things rolling for the Purple Eagles.
Let's talk about Nebraska's lineup. We'll do that next to round out the pregame show. We're just a couple of minutes away from Nebraska and Niagara, 1 p.m. Central Time, first pitch here from Stillwater. So when we come back, we'll talk Nebraska's lineup, what we hope kind of see from it, potential changes that we would suspect Will Bolt to make. We'll be transparent with you guys. We're recording this. It's 10:52 a.m. here at this moment of recording. But you guys are hearing this about 12:45, I would imagine. So when we come back, we will talk about it and kind of just what we'd hope to see from Will Bolt's lineup today in terms of approach and kind of maybe some changes that we could see Will Bolt make with the starting nine coming up to the plate. So when we come back, we'll wrap up the show, give our final thoughts on Nebraska and Niagara as they get ready to duel it out here in less than 10 minutes or so. We'll do that coming up next on 93.7 The Ticket. All right, really quick here, back here on the Nebraska pregame show, getting you ready for Nebraska and Niagara, 1 p.m. Central Time, first pitch from Stillwater O'Brate Stadium. Talked about the stadium, how it played, the approach maybe that you take as a pitcher, also a little bit about Niagara and some of their hitting numbers. Staying on the hitting side of things, I would be interested to see, I would not be surprised also to see maybe a change in the lineup. Tyler Stone put a nice rip on the ball. He was the one that had the line out to center field in the 8th inning with the bases loaded. And Will Bolt said that he was, fine with that hit. He thought they asked Stone to put a good swing on it, and that's what he did. Karen should have tagged up on that per Will Bolt. But ultimately, it just feels like Nebraska is searching for answers from that 6, 7, 8 crew in their lineup, and that has usually the designated hitter, whether that's Tyler Stone or Cole Evans. And then it's also it's then Dylan Carey and Riley Silva. I would not be shocked today to maybe see Evans in right field and Sanderson at designated hitter today, and Evans taking the spot of Tyler Stone in the lineup. I think Nebraska is pretty strong and set at their 1 through 5, and I think that is a good little starting point, right? I think Overbeek is a really good leadoff guy. I think Sanderson in the 2-hole gets some at-bats, can hit the ball pretty well as well. And then you bring up Josh Karen, Columbus, and then round it out with Gabe Swanson. I think, though, that after those 5 guys, Nebraska has been looking for answers. We remember in the Big Ten championship game, Cole Evans was hitting 6th. It just feels like maybe he gives Nebraska a better bridge in some at-bats to bridge the front half of the order and the back half of the order, especially in a game like today where the ability to just put good swings on the ball is going to be important.
Yeah, I think Rhett Stokes is also a key guy that's given some good at-bats from the 9-hole second leadoff guy. Cole Evans being, I don't say bench, but right, not in the lineup for the first 2 games of Nebraska's tournaments, right? The conference tournament, now the NCAA tournament. Kind of puzzling. Hasn't been a superstar, but he's been pretty consistent. He's been pretty solid for a couple years now. And again, it goes back to maybe Nebraska is playing the data, right? They wanted the left-on-right matchup with Tyler Stone instead of the right-right matchup with Cole Evans. But I think Cole Evans has been solid enough that he's not a guy I'm as worried about with the platoons necessarily. When you look at lineup construction, Nick, Nebraska has at least 2 spots consistently that you don't necessarily feel great about. And they're back to back. Now, 1 through 5 being on the same page, when it works, it's great, right? The example I'll use is the Kansas City Royals. They have the worst outfield OPS plus in Major League Baseball right now, and they're still 5th in baseball in runs per game because the top 5 in their lineup are so good. The top 5 in Nebraska's lineup are clearly their 5 best hitters, but it's not so overwhelmingly good that you can afford 6, 7, and 8 to give an opponent, either a free inning, essentially, like has happened a lot, or 2 free outs in an inning, like we saw pretty consistently yesterday. A guy like Riley Silva gets plunked enough, has worked enough walks, and his defense is good enough in center. I'm okay with him at the bottom of the lineup. You can afford that. Dylan Carey's got to prove something here. If Nebraska's going to make a run, there's going to be another spot that Dylan Carey's going to be up in a big moment, and he's got to come through. We just haven't seen it consistently with the bat from him. And his defense is good, but not so great that he should have played in, all but one game so far, right? This goes back to earlier in the year when Carey was scuffling. Why wasn't Nebraska able to give him a day off, collect himself, and see what else they potentially have at shortstop? Maybe the Brumbaugh injury, maybe he would have slipped.
Oh, do we lose Austin? We may have lost Austin. I think he makes a good point there. We might have lost Austin here, so we'll go ahead and take him out until he gets reconnected there. I think he makes a good point, right? We didn't see Brumbaugh, Caden Brumbaugh, that is the former Oklahoma State Cowboy. Didn't see him really incorporate into the run game a whole lot. I would have liked to see maybe him get pinch ran for or be a pinch runner on the base paths, especially in the later stages last night. Yesterday just Nebraska decided not to use Caden Brumbaugh. You don't want to go out of this tournament, whether Nebraska loses today, they lose tomorrow. You don't want to go out of this tournament and have this idea of, well, we left a couple guys on the bench, right? And that's where it's easy to do. It's easy not to do that and not to walk away with that mentality on the pitching mound, because you have the ability to you have the ability to kind of just empty the tank and have guys just, you say, okay, we're going to bring in this guy, he empties the tank, then we bring in this guy, he empties the tank. You don't want to walk away from a tournament and say, man, we should have used a pinch hitter in that situation or a pinch runner in that situation. We bring Austin back in. Austin, you're connected. Shout out to Hotel Wi-Fi. Go ahead and finish your point, man. Oh, no. We lost Austin again. Well, maybe that's the world's way of saying that we need to wrap this up. Let's go ahead and wrap this up. Wait, Austin?
Am I back?
There he is.
We'll try it for a second. Hey,
hashtag back. All right, let's wrap this up in the next 2 minutes here. This is the world's way of saying, guys, get on with it.
Yeah, final thoughts for today. Going 0-2 would be a problem, right? Maybe not Yale Holy Cross level.
Uh-huh.
Nebraska just needs to find a way to get on the board. What it means for the program long term, we'll see. What it means for Troy Dannon and his decision making, we'll see. I'm curious because that any decision for the future isn't going to be based off of one game. But if the offseason starts this afternoon, it's going to be a long one. It's going to feel long. Even if Nebraska just wins this one and is competitive tomorrow, you feel so much better going into the offseason. Like you said, empty the tank. Your back is against the wall. You put yourself in this position by not winning yesterday, right? You have to manage, but the pedal has to be to the metal for 9 innings. You can't afford to let up and go home. And I know you and I aren't ready to see this team go home. I'm sure they're not ready to answer the questions that wait in the offseason. Put good at-bats together. Hit your spots, play defense, see if you can impart control of this game and keep it for longer than you did yesterday.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think it's not some shun of death that Nebraska's 0-1, right? There's a lot of teams 0-1 today. There's a lot of really good
32
teams.
of them.
There's a lot of teams that are better than Nebraska and have been better than Nebraska that are 0-1 today. So it's not this shun of death that Nebraska is needs to hide away and it's a disgrace. That's not what we're getting at. There's a lot of teams that are 0-1 today that expected to be 1-0 coming in today instead. So Nebraska's just got to do their thing. We talked about it. Throw strikes, do their job. And I think Nebraska is going to be okay today. Tomorrow we'll reassess. Obviously, we'll have post-game thoughts right after the game or as soon after the game. So stay tuned to the social media pages. That won't go over the air. That'll just be on our video streams. So make sure if you are listening to this and you want some post-game coverage, Austin and I will be on for however long. We won't have time constraints on that. Would love to take your questions. So you can always tweet at us, Nick_Sainert or at Austin_Orman. I want to thank Mullen Motors, Blur Events, Sandhills Global for their support as well as the other sponsors that we mentioned throughout the show. But Huskers getting ready for Niagara. They'll do that in just a little bit, 1 p.m. first pitch. We'll talk to you guys after the game from Stillwater and what we hope to be a Huskers win right here on 93.7 The Ticket.